So there I was, standing in front of the entire leadership team at Phoenix Technologies, watching my carefully prepared analysis get torn apart like wet tissue paper. Not by data. Not by logic. By silence. Director Kenneth Vance had just pulled me from the decision call. Actually pulled me. Like I was some kind of malfunctioning equipment that needed to be unplugged before it caused more damage. "Amira," he said. That trademark smirk spreading across his face like oil on water. "You slow things down with questions." I nodded. Calmly. You know that nod? The one where your face says, "I understand completely," but your brain is screaming bloody murder? That one. 3 days later, Kenneth burst into my office, his face the color of a fire hydrant, yelling at the top of his lungs. Why did we make the wrong call? But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. 6 months earlier, I joined Phoenix Technologies as a senior strategy analyst. The job posting had used words like innovative thinking, and challenging the status quo, and bringing fresh perspectives to complex problems. You know, the kind of corporate poetry that makes you believe you're going to change the world, instead of just attending 7 meetings about whether to attend an 8th meeting. Kenneth Vance was my direct supervisor. Director of Strategic Operations. 40-something, always wore navy suits that cost more than my monthly rent. Had this way of looking at you like you were a particularly disappointing restaurant meal he'd been served by mistake. When I first met him, he'd shaken my hand with the enthusiasm of someone picking up litter and said, "Just so you know, I don't believe in overthinking." Gut instinct built this division. I should have seen the red flags. They were practically forming a parade formation, but here's the thing about me, I ask questions. Not to be difficult. Not to show off. I ask questions because I've seen what happens when you don't. I watched my previous company lose $14 million because nobody wanted to ask the CEO if he'd actually read the contract he was about to sign. Spoiler alert, he hadn't. There was a clause that basically gave the vendor permission to charge us for breathing their air. So yeah, I ask questions. It's kind of my thing. The first real incident happened during a vendor selection meeting. We were choosing a new cloud infrastructure provider, and Kenneth had basically already decided on a company called Zenith Systems. Their sales rep was charismatic, their presentation had been slick, and their promises were shinier than a freshly waxed Ferrari. I raised my hand. Has anyone verified their uptime claims? Because their case studies are from 2019, and I found 3 separate incidents where, Amira. Kenneth cut me off without even looking up from his phone. We're not here to audit their entire company history. We're here to make a decision. But the contract locks us in for 5 years, which is why we need to move quickly before the pricing window closes. He finally looked at me, that smirk already forming. Sometimes you need to trust your instincts instead of disappearing down every rabbit hole you find. The room went quiet. You could practically hear people's spines snapping to attention, trying to distance themselves from the conversation like I just revealed I had the plague. I backed down, nodded, smiled, hated myself a little. We signed with Zenith Systems the following week. The second incident was worse. We were planning a major product launch, our new AI-powered analytics platform that was supposed to revolutionize how mid-sized companies handled their data operations. Kenneth wanted to launch in 8 weeks. I'd run the numbers, talked to the development team, reviewed the testing protocols. 8 weeks was insane. We'd need at least 14, maybe 16 to do it properly. I prepared a presentation. Charts, timelines, risk assessments. I practiced it in front of my bathroom mirror like I was auditioning for a TED Talk. I was ready. The meeting was on a Thursday. I remember because I'd worn my lucky blazer, the one I'd bought with my first real paycheck. The one that made me feel like I knew what I was doing even when I absolutely didn't. I got through exactly 4 slides. Amira, Kenneth interrupted, leaning back in his chair with his hands behind his head like he was about to explain basic arithmetic to a golden retriever. I appreciate the thoroughness. I really do. But here's what I'm seeing. Analysis paralysis. You're so busy mapping out every possible problem that you're missing the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that if we launch with incomplete testing, the bigger picture. He spoke over me, his voice rising just enough to establish dominance without technically yelling. Is that our competitors are moving fast and we're sitting here debating the color of the curtains while the house is on fire? Heads nodded around the table. Of course they did. Kenneth was the director. Kenneth signed off on promotions. Kenneth decided who got the good projects and who got stuck reviewing expense reports until their soul leaked out through their ears. I just think, and that's the problem. Amira, you think too much. Sometimes you need to trust the process. Trust the team. Trust leadership. He smiled. That goddamn smirk. But the data clearly shows. The data, Kenneth interrupted for the third time, is just one input. Not the only input. We're launching in 8 weeks. If you can get on board with that, great. If not, well, he shrugged. Maybe this role isn't the right fit. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Everyone stared at their laptops or their phones or the fascinating texture of the conference room table. Anywhere but at me. I closed my laptop, nodded. Understood. That was incident 2. Incident 3 was the one that did it. The one that made me realize Kenneth Vance wasn't just annoying or short-sighted. He was dangerous. We were in the final stages of negotiating a partnership with a European firm called Kastner Industries. Big deal. Multi-year contract. Potential for massive expansion into international markets. Kenneth was leading the negotiations, and he was so excited about it he practically vibrated during meetings. I was assigned to review the contract terms. Standard stuff, right? Make sure the legal language protects us. Verify the deliverables match what was promised. Check that the payment schedules make sense. Except the contract was a disaster. The termination clauses were one-sided to the point of absurdity. Kastner could walk away with 30 days notice. We'd need 18 months and had to pay a penalty equal to 40% of the contract value. The intellectual property terms basically gave them co-ownership of anything we developed while the partnership was active, even if it had nothing to do with the actual partnership. And the performance metrics they'd proposed were so vague that they could technically claim we were underperforming even if we exceeded every reasonable expectation. It was a trap wrapped in a handshake wrapped in expensive letterhead. I scheduled a meeting with Kenneth. Just the two of us. I thought maybe if I could walk him through it privately, show him the specific clauses, we could fix this before it became a whole thing. Kenneth, we need to talk about the Kastner contract. He didn't look up from his email. What about it? The terms are heavily skewed in their favor. The termination clause alone could cost us millions if, Amira. Now he looked up. We've been negotiating this deal for 8 months. 8 months. Everyone is on board. Legal reviewed it. Finance reviewed it. The CEO is excited about it. But did they actually read? Of course they read it. What do you think they do all day? I opened my laptop, turned it toward him. Look at section 7.3, the IP clause. It says any developments during the partnership term become joint property. That would include the new algorithm we're building for. It's standard partnership language. It's absolutely not standard. I checked with Amira. He closed my laptop. Actually reached across his desk and closed it. You know what your problem is? You see threats everywhere. You're so busy looking for what could go wrong that you can't see what could go right. This partnership could transform Phoenix Technologies. But you're too stuck in worst-case scenarios to appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate the opportunity, but we need to revise. We're not revising anything. The contract is final. We're signing Monday. Kenneth, please just look at, this conversation is over. And honestly? He leaned forward, and there was something almost gleeful in his eyes. I'm starting to question whether you have the strategic mindset we need on this team. Strategy is about bold moves, not endless analysis. Maybe you'd be better suited for a compliance role. Somewhere your need to question everything would be more appropriate. I sat there, my laptop closed in front of me, my carefully prepared evidence locked away behind the screen. So you won't even look at the specific clauses I've identified? No, Amira, I won't. Because I trust the process we followed. I trust the people who've already reviewed this. And frankly, I'm disappointed that you don't. That's when something crystallized in my mind. This wasn't about me being difficult or overly cautious. Kenneth didn't just dislike questions. He was threatened by them. Every question I asked highlighted the fact that he didn't actually do the deep work. He skimmed. He went with his gut. He trusted that his position meant he was automatically right. And he'd built an entire team culture around protecting that delusion. I walked out of his office and started documenting everything. Every meeting where he dismissed legitimate concerns. Every decision made without proper analysis. Every time someone on the team had raised a red flag and been shot down. I created a private folder on my personal drive and started taking notes. Not for revenge, not yet, just for protection. Because I knew what was coming. We signed the Kastner contract on Monday. Kenneth gave a speech about bold leadership and trusting your instincts. Everyone clapped. I smiled and clapped along, my documentation folder growing heavier in my mind. The Zenith Systems problem started 3 weeks later. The cloud infrastructure they promised. Turns out their uptime claims had been, let's say, creatively interpreted. We experienced 17 separate outages in the first month. Customer data access became intermittent. Our support team was flooded with complaints. The CTO was furious. Kenneth called an emergency meeting. How did we not catch this during vendor selection? I said nothing. Just sat there, remembering the exact moment I'd tried to raise these concerns and been told to trust his instincts. The product launch happened exactly 8 weeks after Kenneth's target date, just like he wanted. It was a catastrophe. The software crashed during the live demo to our biggest potential client. The AI algorithms produced results that were somehow both wildly inaccurate and confidently wrong. Users reported at least 40 critical bugs within the first 72 hours. Our support tickets exploded. The development team worked around the clock trying to patch the disasters. Kenneth called another emergency meeting. We clearly needed more testing. Why didn't the development team flag these issues earlier? I stayed silent. The lead developer, a brilliant woman named Steph Yang, looked like she wanted to throw her laptop at his head. She'd flagged the issues, in writing, multiple times. Kenneth had overruled her because we needed to move fast. But it was the Kastner Industries situation that became my opportunity. The universe has a sense of humor sometimes. Remember that IP clause I tried to warn him about? The one that gave Kastner co-ownership of developments during the partnership term? Well, our team developed a breakthrough algorithm for predictive analytics. Completely revolutionary. Worth potentially hundreds of millions. Kastner immediately claimed joint ownership. Because technically, according to the contract Kenneth had signed without proper review, they were entitled to it. Our legal team panicked. The CEO was furious. The board demanded answers, and Kenneth Vance, director of strategic operations, the man who trusted his gut, who didn't believe in overthinking, who thought questions slowed things down, suddenly needed someone to blame. That's when the big decision call was scheduled. Every senior leader, the CEO, board representatives. The agenda was simple. Figure out how we'd gotten into this mess and determine next steps. I prepared, obviously. I had everything. The original contract review I'd done that Kenneth had dismissed. The email chain where I'd flagged the IP clause. The meeting notes where I'd tried to raise concerns. I had documentation of every single moment where proper analysis had been skipped in favor of gut instinct. I wasn't planning to use it to destroy Kenneth. I was planning to use it to protect myself and maybe, just maybe, to finally get someone to listen about the systematic problems and how we made decisions. The call started at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. I joined right on time, my notes organized, my evidence ready. I was on mute, waiting for my turn to present the contract analysis when Kenneth's voice cut through. Before we dive into the details, I want to address something. We have people on this call who repeatedly slowed down our decision-making process with excessive questioning and analysis paralysis. Their inability to trust leadership judgment has created a culture of hesitation that directly contributed to our current situation. He wasn't saying my name, but everyone knew who he meant. My chest tightened. Was he seriously trying to blame me for the disaster he'd created? In fact, Kenneth continued, his voice taking on that familiar smirk-adjacent quality, I think it would be more productive if certain people stepped back from this conversation. We need decision-makers in this discussion, not people who will derail us with endless questions. There was a pause. Then the CEO spoke. Kenneth, who specifically are you referring to? Amira Dawson. She's been a roadblock in several key initiatives. I think her presence on this call will slow us down. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, Amira, please drop from the call. We'll follow up with you separately. I sat there staring at my screen. My cursor hovered over the leave button. Every nerve in my body was screaming. This was it. The moment where I either accepted this humiliation or I fought back. I clicked raise hand instead. Amira. Kenneth's voice was sharp. You've been asked to leave the call. I have documentation. I said, my voice somehow steady despite my hands shaking. Regarding the contract review process for Kastner Industries. I think it's relevant to this discussion. This isn't the time, Kenneth. The CEO interrupted. Let's hear what she has. 30 seconds, Amira. 30 seconds. I had 30 seconds to save my career and possibly end his. I flagged the IP clause in Section 7.36 weeks before we signed the contract. I requested a meeting to review it. Kenneth declined and told me the contract was final. I have the email exchange, the original analysis and documented meeting notes where I attempted to raise these concerns. The current situation with Kastner was predictable and preventable. Silence. That's a lie, Kenneth said. But his voice had changed. Less smug, more defensive. We had full legal review. I'm happy to share the documentation, I said. Should I send it to the CEO directly or would you like me to post it in the meeting chat? Amira, the CEO said slowly, please post whatever you have in the chat. I started uploading the original contract analysis with my notes highlighting the problematic clauses. The email thread where I'd requested a meeting with Kenneth and his dismissive response. The meeting notes from my attempted one-on-one where he'd closed my laptop and told me the conversation was over. And then, because I'm apparently incapable of doing things halfway, I uploaded my entire documentation folder. Every dismissed concern about Zenith systems. Every warning about the product launch timeline. Every instance where proper analysis had been deemed overthinking. The chat window started lighting up with reactions. I could see people clicking through the documents. Kenneth, the CEO's voice was cold now. You told me legal had thoroughly reviewed this contract. They did. Amira's analysis is dated 6 weeks before signing. It explicitly calls out the IP clause that's causing our current problem. You said you were unaware of this issue until last week. She never brought it to my attention in a formal. There's an email here from Amira requesting a meeting to discuss contract concerns. Your response was, and I quote, contract is final, no changes will be considered. I stopped uploading. Sat back. Waited. There must be context missing, Kenneth started. Kenneth, please drop from the call. We'll follow up with you separately. The irony was so perfect I almost laughed. Almost, Kenneth's icon disappeared from the call. Amira, the CEO said. Stay on. Everyone else take 5. We're going to review these documents and reconvene. The call went on hold. I sat in my home office, staring at my screen, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. What had I just done? The call resumed 20 minutes later. Kenneth didn't rejoin. The CEO spoke first. Amira, I've reviewed your documentation. How many other decisions have been made without proper analysis? I pulled up my tracking spreadsheet. I've documented 47 instances over the past 6 months where concerns were raised and dismissed without investigation. 17 of those have resulted in measurable negative outcomes. Another 23 are still pending, but early indicators suggest problems. Why didn't you escalate this earlier? It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself for months. I tried, I said simply, but the culture here doesn't reward questions. It punishes them. Every time I raised concerns, I was told I was overthinking, that I needed to trust leadership, that I was slowing things down. Eventually, you learn to stay quiet, or you start looking for another job. More silence. Then, send me everything you have. Every document, every email, every note. We'll need to conduct a full review. Understood. And Amira? You're now reporting directly to me until further notice. I need someone who asks questions. Apparently, that's been in short supply around here. The call ended. I sat there for a long moment staring at my screen, trying to process what had just happened. Had I really just? My phone buzzed. A message from Steph, the lead developer. Holy shit! You're my hero. Then another from someone in finance. Finally someone said something. Then another. And another. Turns out I wasn't the only one who'd been keeping documentation. The next 72 hours were a blur. The CEO launched a full review of decision-making processes across the division. Steph and others came forward with their own documentation of dismissed concerns and overruled expertise. The pattern was clear. Kenneth had built an empire on gut instinct and intimidation, and it was costing Phoenix Technologies millions. Kenneth was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. 2 days after that, he was fired. Not quietly. Not with a golden parachute, just gone. His replacement was announced the following week, an external hire with a background in risk management and process improvement. Her first message to the team was, I want to hear your concerns, especially the ones you've been afraid to raise. People actually started asking questions in meetings again. Real questions. Not the performative kind meant to look engaged, but actual challenges to assumptions and requests. For data, the Kastner situation was still a disaster. That wound would take years to heal, but we renegotiated some terms using leverage from other clauses they'd violated. The Zenith Systems contract was bought out early at significant cost, but less than if we'd stayed the full term. The product was pulled back, properly tested, and relaunched 6 months later to much better reception. Phoenix Technologies survived. Barely. But it survived. As for me? 3 months after Kenneth's departure, I was promoted to Director of Strategic Analysis. My official job description included the phrase, challenge assumptions and ask difficult questions. I framed that part of the offer letter. The thing is, I didn't set out to get Kenneth fired. I really didn't. I just wanted to do my job. I wanted my analysis to matter. I wanted decisions to be based on data, instead of whatever feeling someone had right after their morning coffee. But Kenneth had built a system where asking questions was treated like a threat. And when you build a system like that, you're basically guaranteeing that eventually, someone's going to compile enough evidence of your failures to bury you. I just happened to be methodical about it. Sometimes, I think about that moment when he pulled me from the call. That smirk. You slow things down with questions. He was right, technically. Questions do slow things down. They make you pause, reconsider, dig deeper. They prevent you from signing disastrous contracts or launching half-broken products or selecting vendors who can't deliver on their promises. Turns out, slowing down isn't always a bad thing. 3 days after that call, the one where Kenneth burst into my office screaming about why we'd made the wrong decision, I got an email from the CEO. Subject line: thank you. The email was short. Your questions saved us from making an even bigger mistake. Don't ever stop asking them. I printed it out. Put it in the same frame as my job description. Sometimes I walk past Kenneth's old office. It's occupied by someone from the finance team now. They keep the door open, and I can hear them on calls, asking detailed questions about budget allocations and risk assessments. Their walls are covered in charts and data visualizations. Nobody tells them they're overthinking. Nobody says they slow things down with questions. Funny how that works. Do I feel bad about what happened to Kenneth? People ask me that sometimes. Other directors, people from different departments, even my own team members have asked if I ever regret compiling all that documentation. If I wish I'd handled it differently. The honest answer? No, not even a little bit. Kenneth didn't get fired because I asked questions. He got fired because he consistently made bad decisions, dismissed expertise, and blamed others when his gut instincts turned out to be catastrophically wrong. I just provided the documentation. Although I'll admit, there's a certain poetic justice to the fact that the man who hated questions ultimately got taken down by the answer to one very simple question: did you actually do your job? Turns out he hadn't. But here's what I've learned. Every organization has a Kenneth. Maybe not the exact same flavor, but someone who mistakes confidence for competence, who treats expertise like a threat, who builds their authority on making sure nobody looks too closely at their actual track record. And every organization has people like me. People with spreadsheets and documentation folders and a stubborn refusal to pretend that gut instinct is a substitute for analysis. The question is whether the organization creates space for those people to speak up, or whether it teaches them to stay quiet until they've collected enough evidence to protect themselves. Phoenix Technologies learned which kind of organization it wanted to be. The hard way. The expensive way. The way that could have been avoided if someone had just listened to the questions being asked. I'm still here, still asking questions, still slowing things down when needed. My team has tripled in size. We've prevented at least a dozen potentially disastrous decisions in the past year alone. We've also identified opportunities that leadership had overlooked because they were too busy moving fast to notice them. And yeah, sometimes people get frustrated with me. Sometimes I can see them thinking, here comes Amira with another question, another concern, another reason we can't just move forward. But you know what? Nobody's burst into my office screaming about making the wrong call. Not yet. Anyway, last week, I was in a meeting with the new CEO and the board. We were discussing a potential acquisition. Huge deal. Transformative opportunity. Everyone was excited. I raised my hand. Has anyone looked at their customer retention rates over the past 3 years? Because their marketing materials show growth, but I'm seeing some concerning patterns in their quarterly reports. The room got quiet. I could feel that familiar tension, That moment where everyone holds their breath to see if asking questions is allowed. Or if we're back to the old ways. The CEO smiled. Amira, that's exactly why you're in this room. What did you find? I pulled up my analysis. We spent the next hour digging into the data. Turned out the acquisition target was growing through aggressive sales, but hemorrhaging customers on the back end. Their churn rate was catastrophic. If we'd acquired them, we'd have bought a gorgeous-looking facade hiding a crumbling foundation. We walked away from the deal. 2 months later, they went bankrupt. The CFO sent me a bottle of wine with a note. You just saved us $40 million. Please never stop being annoying. I kept the note. Threw out the wine. I don't drink. But the sentiment was nice. Here's what nobody tells you about being the person who asks the hard questions. It's exhausting. Not just intellectually, though that's part of it. It's emotionally draining to constantly be the one pumping the brakes, to be the voice saying, wait. Have we considered this? When everyone else is ready to sprint forward, you become the villain in 1,000 small moments. The person who ruins the celebratory mood by pointing out the flaw in the plan. The one who turns a quick 15-minute alignment call into a 90-minute deep dive because you notice something off in the data. The buzzkill. The skeptic. The one who never just goes with the flow, but you also become the person they call at midnight when something goes catastrophically wrong and they need someone who actually read the contract. The person they trust with the projects that can't afford to fail. The person who gets promoted not because you're likable, but because you're right often enough that the organization can't afford to ignore you. I've made peace with that trade-off. Mostly. There are still moments, though. Moments when I'm in a meeting and I can see everyone else's eyes glaze over as I walk through my analysis. Moments when I can practically hear them thinking, here she goes again. Moments when I wonder if maybe Kenneth was right about one thing, maybe. I do overthink. But then I remember the Kastner contract. The product launch disaster. The Zenith Systems nightmare. All the disasters that could have been prevented if someone had just asked one more question. And I remember Kenneth's face when he burst into my office 3 days after pulling me from that call. Red-faced and screaming about how we'd made the wrong decision. The sheer audacity of his rage. As if he hadn't been the one who dismissed every warning, silenced every concern, bulldozed through every checkpoint that might have caught the problem. That memory keeps me going. You want to know the real kicker? I ran into Kenneth about 6 months after he was fired. Pure coincidence. I was at a coffee shop near the office, waiting for my order, scrolling through my phone when I heard that voice. Amira Dawson. Fancy seeing you here. I looked up. There he was, same navy suit, same carefully styled hair, same smirk. Though maybe the smirk was a bit more forced than I remembered. Kenneth, I said. Because what else do you say to the person whose career you helped destroy? I hear you got my old job. Director of Strategic Analysis. Quite the promotion. He emphasized the title just enough to make it sound like an insult. Something like that. Must be nice. Getting ahead by throwing your colleagues under the bus. He said it casually, like he was commenting on the weather. Like he genuinely believed that's what had happened. I could have let it go. Should have, probably. The mature thing would have been to nod politely, grab my coffee, and leave. But you know what? I was tired of being mature. I didn't throw you under the bus, Kenneth. I documented your decisions and their outcomes. You threw yourself under the bus. I just provided the evidence that it happened. His smirk faltered. You sabotaged me because you couldn't handle my leadership style. Your leadership style cost Phoenix Technologies millions of dollars. Multiple times. I tried to prevent that. You told me to stop asking questions. I told you to stop wasting everyone's time with your paranoid overanalysis. The Kastner IPA clause. The Zenith uptime problems. The product launch timeline. I flagged all of it. You dismissed all of it. How is that paranoid overanalysis when every single thing I warned about actually happened? People were starting to stare. Kenneth noticed. Lowered his voice. You always had it out for me. I had it out for bad decisions. You just happened to make a lot of them. He leaned in, and for a second I saw something ugly flash across his face. You think you're so smart. So superior. But let me tell you something, Amira. Nobody likes working with someone who questions everything. You might have your fancy title now, but eventually people are going to get tired of your attitude. Just like they got tired of mine. There's a difference though. Oh? What's that? When people got tired of you, it was because you were consistently wrong. When people get tired of me, it's because I'm consistently right. One of those is a lot easier to tolerate than the other. His face went red. That same fire hydrant color from when he'd burst into my office. For a moment I thought he might actually yell at me right there in the coffee shop, in front of 24 witnesses with phone cameras. Instead, he smiled. That terrible, familiar smirk. We'll see how long that lasts. Enjoy it while you can, Director Dawson. He walked out. I stood there, hands shaking, heart pounding, absolutely furious and absolutely vindicated at the same time. The barista called my name. I grabbed my coffee. My hands were still trembling. That guy seems like a real piece of work, the barista said quietly. I laughed. Couldn't help it. You have no idea. That encounter stuck with me for days. Not because Kenneth had gotten under my skin, though he had. A bit, but because of what he'd said about nobody liking to work with someone who questions everything. He wasn't entirely wrong. Being right doesn't make you popular. It makes you valuable, which isn't the same thing. Valuable means people need you. Popular means people want you around. I've learned to be okay with being the former. After that meeting, one of the board members pulled me aside. Kenneth used to be in these meetings, you know? Before your time. We fired him once before, from a previous company. Should have known better than to give him another shot. Why, did you? I asked. He shrugged. He was confident, charismatic, seemed like he knew what he was doing. Took us too long to realize he was just good at looking the part. What changed? Someone started asking questions. He smiled. Sound familiar? I think about that conversation sometimes. About how many other companies Kenneth has probably moved through, leaving disaster in his wake. Protected by his confidence and his smirk and his ability to convince people that questions are the enemy. But here's the thing about questions. They're persistent. They're patient. They accumulate evidence. They wait for their moment. And eventually, if you dismiss enough of them, they'll bury you. Kenneth learned that lesson the hard way. I just provided the shovel. So yeah. When people ask if I feel bad about what happened, I tell them the truth. I feel bad that it took so long. I feel bad that we lost millions of dollars and damaged customer relationships and burned out talented employees before someone finally listened. But do I feel bad that Kenneth Vance is no longer in a position to silence the people, asking the questions that could save his company from disaster? Not even a little bit. Sometimes the questions slow you down. Sometimes they save you. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, they do both. Kenneth just never learned to tell the difference.